Today, we will explore some of the worst jobs in science recorded throughout history. The self-experimenter. In 1984, Australian Dr. Barry Marshall believed stomach ulcers were caused by a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori. The medical consensus was that the stomach was too acidic for bacteria to survive there, and that ulcers were caused by stress and spicy food. Marshall had cultured the bacteria. He had the data. Gastroenterology conferences told him he was wrong, and moved on to the next speaker. So he drank a petri dish of H. pylori, developed acute gastritis within 5 days, nausea, vomiting, bad breath. His wife described in interviews as putrid, confirmed the infection by endoscopy, treated himself with antibiotics, and published. He won the Nobel in 2005. His co-researcher Robin Warren also won for the original discovery, having not drunk anything. Werner Forssmann in 1929 was a 25-year-old surgical resident who wanted to demonstrate that a catheter could be safely threaded through a vein into the heart. His supervisor said absolutely not. So Forssmann anesthetized his own arm, inserted the catheter into a vein, threaded it 65 centimeters toward his heart, walked to the radiology department, catheter hanging out of his arm, positioned himself under an X-ray machine, and took a photograph proving it worked. He won the Nobel in 1956. Less successful was Stubbins Epworth, a medical student who in 1804 was trying to prove yellow fever wasn't contagious. He poured infected black vomit, the terminal discharge of yellow fever patients, into cuts on his arms. Nothing. He poured it in his eyes. Nothing. He drank it. Nothing. He concluded yellow fever was not contagious and published his thesis. He was wrong. Yellow fever is spread by mosquitoes, and he just encountered 0 mosquitoes during his experiment. The sewer gas inspector. Miasma theory. The idea that disease comes from bad air, specifically from the smell of rotting things. This was wrong, but it was wrong in a very specific, almost useful way, because the things that smelled bad were usually also full of cholera, and so avoiding the smell was accidentally decent public health advice. Victorian London took this and turned it into a profession. Sanitary inspectors whose job was to go into sewers, assess the smell, and file reports on the quality of the miasma. They had taxonomies. Good smell, dangerously bad smell. They carried notebooks. They went down regularly, sometimes daily. They were frequently ill. They attributed their illness to the bad smells rather than, say, the cholera water they were standing in. John Snow ended all of this in 1854, at least in theory, by mapping 500 deaths from a cholera outbreak onto a street grid and noticing they clustered around one water pump on Broad Street. He removed the handle. The outbreak stopped. Nobody in the sewer gas industry wanted to hear this because it would make them redundant, so acceptance was slow. This is a pattern in science that remains completely unchanged today. The radium dial painter, 1917 to 1930s. It's 1917. Radium has been discovered. It glows. People think this means it's healthy. There is radium chocolate, radium face cream, a drink called Radithor that was literally just water with radium dissolved in it, and a golf club manufacturer who advertised radium-lined golf balls for better performance. None of this is the job we're talking about. This is just context for how badly calibrated the era was about glowing things. The U.S. Radium Corporation in Orange, New Jersey needed people to paint luminous dials on watches for WWI soldiers. Tiny dials, tiny brushes, tiny precise strokes. To keep a fine point on the brush, workers were trained to do this. Put the brush in your mouth. Form a point with your lips. Dip it in the radium paint. Apply to dial. Repeat. Lip, dip, paint. All day, every day, hundreds of times per shift. The supervisors wore lead aprons and used tongs to handle the radium. They told the workers it was fine. Some workers, thinking it harmless, painted their teeth and nails with the stuff to glow at their boyfriends on the way home. Around 1922, a dial painter named Molly Maja went to her dentist with a toothache. He pulled the tooth, the socket didn't heal. He pulled another tooth, the jaw around it crumbled. The doctor was eventually called in, and when he pressed on what remained of her lower jaw, it came apart in his hand. She was 24. She died a few months later. The company's response was to hire a doctor to conclude, in a report they commissioned and reviewed before release, that the workers' health problems were caused by syphilis, specifically and individually, each sick woman. Syphilis. The company used this to avoid paying compensation for about 3 years before the scheme collapsed in court. 5 of the workers sued too sick to walk into the courthouse and settled in 1928. The settlement got them medical coverage, $10,000 each, and an annual payment of $600 for life. Most of them didn't live long enough for that to matter. The Resurrectionist, 1700s to 1820s. So, to teach surgery, you need bodies. To get bodies, in 18th century Britain, you basically had two legal options: executed murderers, or the charity poor who died in workhouses. The supply was, charitably, about 40 bodies a year for the entire country. Medical schools needed hundreds. So someone had to fill the gap, and that someone was the Resurrectionist, which is a word that sounds a lot more dignified than the guy who digs up your grandmother. The technique was specific. You didn't dig up the whole grave. Too slow, too obvious. You dug a narrow shaft at the head end, broke open the coffin lid, looped a rope under the corpse's armpits, and hauled it out. Done right. Under 2 hours. Done wrong. You got caught by the family's hired night watchman, who was also armed, and who was not having a philosophical debate about the advancement of medicine with you at 3 a.m. in a churchyard. Families responded by buying iron coffins, then iron cages, called mort safes, bolted over graves, and then just posting armed relatives for the first 2 weeks until decomposition made the body useless to surgeons. The market had a freshness window. After about 14 days, no sale. William Burke and William Hare decided the freshness window was the problem and addressed it by skipping the waiting for death step entirely. They murdered at least 16 people in Edinburgh between 1827 and 1828 and sold the bodies to anatomist Robert Knox, who purchased them, asked no follow-up questions whatsoever, and dissected them in front of students. The situation came to an end when fellow lodgers found the body of the final victim, Margaret Docherty, stored under Burke's bed. Hare turned King's evidence against Burke in exchange for immunity. Burke was subsequently hanged. His body was publicly dissected, and his skeleton was placed on display at the Edinburgh Medical School. It remains there.